Chapter 4. The Battle over Shanxi. Shanxi was a garden world, in every sense of the word. Though much of her land masses were blanketed in high, nigh impenetrable mountain ranges, the valleys and vales between them were choked with buzzing life. Thick, temperate forests, fertile riverlands, and the beautiful and peaceful wildlife gave her colonists a wonderful place to lay their cities and farms. By Dr. Kingston's reckoning, this place could become home to a farming colony as bountiful as harvest was decades before. Kingston took in the cool breeze that blew down the streets of New Landing. Her buildings were still brand new. White marble and gray slate edifices stood proudly in her city center, the abundance of the stone in the nearby hills allowing the opulence. It reminded him of home, the grand boulevards and proud structures of Washington, D.C. The city was only mildly busy at this hour. After the colonial government called a level green, people were skittish and would rather stay home and enjoy the free day off work rather than risk the danger evident in the alert. As the head administrator of Landing Regional Hospital, it was technically his responsibility to go to the security meetings generated by these levels, but this was the fourth one this month. Kigyar pirate sightings 100 light years off were really only something he could stomach with a belly full of dim sum, so he plotted a course to one of his favorite Cantonese restaurants. The air raid sirens started blaring from the speakers, catching Kingston and his fellow pedestrians in open shock. The city AI, she, started to belt out her warning. Alert! Alert! Level orange situation declared. All residents immediately follow emergency evacuation and shelter plans. Militia members, please. The sound of the panicked crowd and the clear ring of Xi's speech faded as Kingston fell into a deep panic. Where was his husband? His children? Kai was probably supervising at the space elevator construction site, and the twins should still be at school. The phone ringing in his pocket brought him back to the urgency of the present. Is this Dr. Well Kingston? A cool, masculine voice rumbled over his phone. Yes, what is it? Your expertise is needed by the Shanxi Security Council. An armored personnel carrier has been dispatched to your position. Do not leave your current position. But what about your family is being relocated to a secure facility. Please remain in your current position. The line went dead before he could get another word in. The rough, utilitarian ships of the Shanxi Defense Fleet floated gracefully in the infinite night of space. The graceless edges and angular dimensions hid a beauty. A glorious meld of science, engineering, and the human spirit. His fleet represented the spirit of humanity, the scrappy, brilliant bastards that told the universe to shove it and broke all its rules just to prove it could. His ships would once again prove his race on the field of battle. Not that he was excited about their prospects. Rear Admiral Jones studied the organized chaos that was Shanxi's space station. Over 100 merchants and space liners, elegant in comparison to their defenders, raced to exit Shanxi's gravity well. His fleet was ill-equipped for any sort of unknown force. His own flagship, the ancient Ion-class carrier More Than One, was avoiding an extended stay at the museum only because it was the last carrier the UNSC could spare. Her main gun hadn't been fired since the Great War. Her fighter complement was at 3/4 capacity. This felt like a challenge mode in a strategy game. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not really. His first posting as a Rear Admiral was supposed to be a relaxed thing, where he learned the ropes of fleet command. He'd only just been promoted, for God's sake, and now he was in charge of a first-contact war. He pushed down the vomit creeping up his throat. Shanxi's fleet was 15 strong now. His carrier, 3 destroyers, 5 frigates, 6 corvettes. A force designed primarily for escort and patrol, and yet it would be used to defend 3 million souls. Jones sighed before pulling himself from the observation deck. He couldn't plan a successful defense from an empty room, unfortunately, so he entered the grav lift and made his way toward the bridge. The bridge of a carrier is a uniquely chaotic experience. Bridge officers and air chiefs keep the air at a low din at best. Now, with a battle brewing just beyond some strange artifact, that low din had turned into something better described as a school cafeteria. As he marched through the shouting lieutenants and air commanders, he gave a knowing glance to Captain Jensen, who looked up from a red-faced supply officer to give a pleading look before returning. The tack room, despite being filled with his staff officers, had also devolved into a shouting match, one that went on a little too long in his presence. Jones got the attention of his staff with an ear-splitting whistle he learned at boot camp, which startled his officers to attention. An awkward silence settled over the room. "Admiral Jones," started one officer before she trailed off. "Now that I have everyone's attention," he returned their salutes, sending his officers scrambling into their seats. "Has your team discussed the battle plan?" Several officers began to speak at once before quieting at once as well. A look befell the table as something like shame crept into the air. "Guess not. Commodore Kitfield, would you like to share the prevailing intelligence with the rest of the class?" Kitfield stood quickly. "Sir, our team has devised 3 basic tactical outlooks based on Captain Dinoka's," he nodded toward the captain, "assessment of the enemy." A wall screen lit up at the far end of the room as the Commodore continued. "Based on assessment of ship maneuverability and speed, specifically during the assault by the Morning Star, alien vessels have displayed superiority in real space maneuverability and acceleration. Unfortunately, after the morning's use of holographic decoys, it's unlikely it'll work again. We'll have to rely on the good old-fashioned for this fight." Another officer, Chief Specialist Harner, rose. "From the readings taken by Dancer, we can confirm that whatever sort of FTL used by these fleets is based on a sort of mass-affecting phenomena similarly to the tuning forks." "You're saying the forks are made by the same aliens?" asked Jones. "I'm saying they use the same principles. This could be another case like the Covenant." The comparison sent a shiver down the spine of everyone in the room. The scars the Covenant left on every human were intense, even a century after the end of the war, in the collapse of their government. "Let's not be so hasty, Specialist Kitfield. Continue your briefing." "Thank you, sir. Since we are likely at a maneuverability disadvantage, I'd recommend staying at range and letting our superior guns thin their numbers before we enter knife fighting range." "What gives you the impression they're weaker?" Kitfield motioned to another officer. "Lieutenant Ez can give you a weapons breakdown." The lieutenant stood. "Based on the ranges at which they chose to fire their weapons, we estimate a significant range advantage on our end, though the disparity in average velocity is significant. Our rounds travel significantly more slowly, with the exception of the S-MAX and Capital-class ships, of which we have none. Any other pertinent information?" "Yields for these weapons couldn't be calculated, as both corvettes sustained significant damage too quickly from multiple sources. Energy weapons were also detected by Dancer, but yields could not be determined, though it seems they're primarily close-range weapons. That's all, Admiral." "I see, then I suggest we get to work." Plasma cooked the stone and metal, and the building sagged under the stress. People screamed and were hosed down as they ran out of the entrance. The heat of passing bolts could scald flesh, did in the packed crowds. Those who were hit, well, usually they died. But the screams when they didn't, shrill, like the screams of the fighters above. He carried her, the pregnant woman who'd begged for help, as her leg lay split like a log. He'd blasted a hole through the lines of grunts and jackals, yet he heard his shield fizzle, the klaxon sound as the woman went limp. He found a place to stop, a place to rest for just a moment from the ver of the plasma and the thunk of the rifles. He put her down and saw her face. "Chief?" The flash of blue to his right brought him back to the graceful Dancer. Back to human space for the first time in, what did Cortana say? 50 years. "Chief!" His mind reacted to what he heard, and he turned toward Cortana, her face on the monitor twisted with worry. "You all right, Chief? You haven't moved in a while." He stretched his legs before standing before the mirror. He hadn't seen his face in years. Many, in fact, hadn't had a room to himself for longer. He studied the lines that weren't there before, the scars that crisscross. "I'm fine, Cortana." His arm came up to feel them, the lines and scars, but it dropped before they touched. He drove the memories out of his head, all the painful things. "The Dancer is about to land on Shanxi," the low rumble of atmospheric resistance confirmed her. "Thought you might want to join the officers' briefing, being that you're technically an officer." Non-commissioned. Oh, come on, it's not like they'd actually stop you from attending. Do it, please. For me? I want to see all the fancy toys they've invented since we left. Cortana's puppy eyes looked more like daggers trained on major arteries. But Jon was convinced, based entirely on the fact that he didn't want to know the retribution he'd receive if he didn't. He made to put on his armor, the battered green suit that was piled neatly in the corner of the room. Yet something in him felt apprehension. That was the word. Okay, we'll go. Cortana practically exploded at HFY on one condition. Ava Peters had seen more than her fair share of insanity, not even counting the past few days. But a Spartan in Navy regs was something you only believed if you saw it. How anyone had managed to find fitting pants and a shirt for a man that stood over 2 meters tall boggled her mind, and the fact that the most famous human ever was standing barefaced for the first time in the same room. Well, she was pinching herself every few minutes, and nothing seemed to disappear. So she probably wasn't dreaming. It had been only a day since the dancer had returned to human space. Hours since Shanxi signaled via the emergency beacon that shit had hit the fan. Unfortunately, as the beacon was really more like a dead man's switch, all that high command knew was that the fan was in trouble, and not that the fan was being run over by a septic tank. Wave space links hadn't been set up in Shanxi system yet, which meant they wouldn't know until tight beam comms reached the colony foundation, in a week along with the other refugees. Their relief force could be walking into 1,000 alien ships, in a colony that's already ash. She put that out of her head. Right. The Master Chief in Regs, Hera's XO and by-the-book commander that he was currently detailing the damage dealt to the dancer by the Forks due to the towing of the Dawn. He'd been doing it for nearly an hour now, even though nearly all the bridge officers knew the damage by heart. She almost wished Aubin was here just so she could share a cynical look with the Oni agent every once in a while. The cool gray color briefing room was cramped with dancers, 8 officers and representatives, and was clearly the only room in the ship not touched by color. She assumed that was Harris's idea. Sidhu was the first to crack. A white lie to escape the druggery, a problem with weapon calibrations or some such. Then Jin for comm tower supervision, then the Marine Commander Vanzo working on integration with local forces, until suddenly it was only Anna, Harris, Cortana, and the Master Chief, and Ziska technically, but Anna doubted he was actually listening anymore. Cortana, though, she was probably the best audience member there was, asking questions about everything from the Mac to crew quarters, and the Chief, practically a statue, yet every glance at his ice blue eyes told her he was alert, watching his AI ask and learn. Ava was trying to think of a polite way to escape this hell, when a klaxon sounded through the ship. Harris was jolted by the clanging sound, red alert. He rushed out of the briefing room and onto the bridge as crew members poured in. Jin, status report. The woman raised her hand as she cupped one ear of her headphones. Fleetcom reports 42, 48, 51 ships appearing from the Fork. Energy signatures match the hostile aliens. A sharp wave of despair swept the bridge. Harris took a long, shuddering breath. Okay, engineering. Can you give an estimate on how our engines are doing? A pause was held before Jin quietly whispered. Sir, you are engineering. Harris muttered under his breath. Right, Ziska. Can you get me an update from Lieutenant Nina in engineering? Already have it, Commander. She says we'd be moving at 12 flank at best if we left dry dock now. Shields are at 100%. But hull integrity is poor, approaching failing. My opinion, we shouldn't leave the spaceport. And be sitting ducks? The following silence was deafening. All ships have successfully transited the relay, Admiral, comms reported. Litronox only grinned. Sensors, give me a readout on the system. Where are they hiding? Sir, we're picking up massive amounts of artificial energy sources around the second planet. Garden class, energy signatures match the Batarian ships, numbering 10, 6 frigates, 3 cruisers, and a dreadnought. What? Confirm that, Litronox practically shouted. All ships confirm. Size measured between 1,300 and 1,500 meters. Litronox cursed under his breath, a sharp thing that betrayed his shock. Are these Batarians insane? Sir? A science officer stood beside him. Yes, Lieutenant Vakar? Exasperation tinged at Litrinox's voice. It's the opinion of the first strategists, Orcs and Falsar, that the combatants may be a new species. A murmur spread quickly at that. What gives them such an idea? We've analyzed the electronic warfare package sent by the enemy. It seems it was a translation package for a language we can't identify. De Solas approached then. You're saying we opened fire on a damn first contact party. Whispers were now turning into full-on disrespectful conversation. Quiet down. It quieted to a more respectable whisper at the Admiral's admonishment. But Litrinox knew that was only due to Turian discipline. If what you say is true, we've broken more than a few council laws. Litrinox's own whisper was slight. This must be a young race, what with their poor protection of such a populated planet. Perhaps they could be made to submit to the hierarchy. Are you in, sir, if the council finds out? De Sola struggled to maintain his professionalism. What justification could we possibly have for war? His outrage spilled volume into his voice. Their breaking of Citadel conventions, Sub-Admiral, their use of nuclear weapons, of opening relays. How could they know of such laws? It does not matter, the Admiral shouted again for everyone to hear. It is that, or it is our disgrace. The Admiral made a nervous gesture, a flexing of his mandibles only scarcely seen by his men. Has the language package been translated? He asked the statuesque science officer. A basic translation has been compiled, sir. Then send this message to the primitives. Admiral Jones was conversing with his AI, Leanders, when his comms officer shouted, Aliens are blasting a message on all frequencies. The bridge only barely reacted to that, a point of pride for the Admiral, who was himself left open-mouthed. Let's hear it! A scramble of interference began to play from the speakers. Vier Turian hierarchiet. Overgive Yeres skib o rum stationer og Yeres le vil bliva skanet. Confusion spread through their ranks quickly. He could feel it spread through his fleet. It was the captain of his flagship, Jensen, that first said what rankled thousands of humans across the planet. The aliens speak Danish? I guess, was all Jones managed to say. How did they learn this? Came a solid 10 seconds later, and was a question directed at nobody in particular. His AI, a man dressed in the thick woolen fashion of 1800s Europe, appeared in a flourish of gray light. The contact packages use uncommon languages to protect military communications in English. That did make more sense. Jensen, you can speak Danish, right? I can. What did they say? Essentially, sir, surrender or die. Ah, nothing unexpected then. Continue preparations. Comms seemed disappointed for a second. Nothing to say back, sir? The Admiral pondered for a moment before he spoke. Fuck you. The Solarian frigate Wandering Eye slipped into the system that so troubled the Turians that they needed the whole 15th Patrol Fleet. They entered in sour moods. Their attempt to ascertain the nature of the aliens ruined by the brutal destruction of their ships by the vast superiority of the Turian fleet. The first alien ship, which had tried in vain to contact the Turians, was little more than scraps of floating metal, and had left nothing of interest beyond a curious metal alloy, which seemed to be made for impressive radiation protection. The second was also mostly ruined, though some scraps of biological material were recovered. All of it was burned and unhelpful. Even the computer they'd recovered was half blasted and entirely wiped of data. Clever things, these aliens, the female Solarian thought. Secretive, despite an ignorance of the wider galaxy. A shame they will be conquered. They might have been interesting. In any case, it was her job to learn more about the species, and so it was necessary they find some intact, or at least mostly intact, specimens of technology and biology for study, as was the way of the STG. Ma'am, a suitable target has been detected on system outskirts, appears to be attempting to escape system in stealth. This is predict 89% likelihood that they're civilian. Excellent work, Duro. Gerto, run cold lure, prepare your operatives. We're boarding in 15. The calm exterior of the Dalatras hid her excitement. She stared at the small dot marking the vessel. Soon you will reveal your secrets. The tactical map loomed large in Jones's mind as he walked from station to station, surveying his staff officers at work. A few minutes ago, Captain Jensen had ordered the launching of her 300 fighters from the more than one, and the endless chatter of the air commanders had lowered to a mere whisper of sound. He listened to the chatter spurned by the fleet, his captains and commanders, the marshal on Shanxi station, the cool and professional words that reverberated around the room. He watched as 50-odd alien ships silently approached. He could almost see them now from the huge windows at the front of the room. His eyes were far less powerful than the tac sensors, radar, and tight beam pings that every ship his fleet was sending back here. Yet despite all that, he could swear he saw the gray, angled ships of his enemy. He walked over to his sensors and knew time was almost up. The enemy was entering extreme effective range for Shanxi Station's SCMAC. The battle was soon to be fought. "Give me General Comms." The officer gave the affirmative, and for a moment he developed stage fright, the enormity of the situation suddenly weighing down. He shook it off and began. "Soldiers of the UNSC, this is your admiral speaking. I'll make this quick, as I know you don't need inspiration to do your damnedest. I only wish to give you purpose, to remind you that we fight not simply for ourselves or our ships or our colony. No, we fight for all humanity, for all her people in every city, on every farm, every desolate rock and glorious citadel. We fight for them, and today we'll make sure those aliens never forget it. Good luck, though I'm sure you won't need it. Sir, Shanxi Station has begun her barrage on the enemy fleet." So it begins. Litronox suddenly hated these primitives with a singular passion. Their station, one blasted station, had managed to utterly destroy 3 of his vessels before they'd even managed to enter battery range. Litronox had maneuvered his fleet into an orderly line of battle, his frigates on the extreme flanks in front, screening for mines, fighters, and other frigates, while his heavy ships in the back were content to lob artillery shells at the enemy's own measly frigates. That classic strategy was thrown straight out the window when a station opened up with a slug moving at an ungodly percentage of the speed of light. The cruiser Felins, along with the frigates Jera and Litsi, had been annihilated in the first blast, and his fleet was now taking evasive maneuvers. The admiral was suitably impressed by these whelps. When you don't have EASO, just make the gun bigger, then build a station around it. It also seriously threw his plans into disarray. Detecting fighter screens estimated 300 or more fighters on left and right flanks. There was no time for shock silences in battle, only action. Redirect our fighter screens to meet them. Authorize frigates on the left and right to pull in and engage. A flare of light shone on in his center. "Diaster has been destroyed, sir." Litronox knew their captain, he noted dimly, as the ruins of the shattered ship drifted speedily into view. Knocked horribly by the station cannon the aliens wielded, the line of the far-off alien ships then erupted into light. "We're taking fire from those damn ships. What distance till our accelerators are in green?" "1 light second, sir." A crash sounded from around him, sending the officer into his console with a sickening thud. "Barriers down 35%. We just took a hit from their dreadnought. Re-angle kinetic barriers on degree. Give me a firing solution on those damn frigates. All cruisers target designated. Enemy fighters engage with primary screens. Fleet has entered green distance. Open fire." His own fleet began to return volleys as blue-gray streaks of light met the orange balls of flame that raced across the night and bombarded the enemy in flares of blue shielding and green explosions. An enemy frigate was sundered by a blast from a cruiser, sending it careening into fighters along her flanks. Another deftly dodged missiles while launching torpedoes of its own into the belly of a Turian cruiser. Other slower missiles exploded into nuclear fire when intercepted, further enraging his fleet. Litronox reveled as the battle commenced, absorbed and added his own voice into the chorus of battle communications. He grinned ferally as his vessel lined up with one of the bulky and elongated cruisers of the enemy and fired 4 rounds in quick succession, popping its tough shield with the help of cruisers of the line and gutting it with 2 final cracks of his cannon. Swarms of their fighters still dogged his own, but he was sure the frigates could defeat them, and the enemy's own frigate escorts. Still, his losses were troubling. The super cannon claimed another cruiser, this one only kilometers from the Redisome, spewing atmosphere from a rending wound along the back of its superstructure. Be advised, heavy fighters carry torpedoes, prioritize crafts. Mayday, mayday, Corsair is dead in the water. We're pushing those bastards back. Enemy frigate destroyed. We're losing barriers on our stern, requesting an egress through the battle lines. We're detecting energy on the planet's spinward horizon. I'm starting to hate these damn savages. Do we have details? Latrinox growled. 5 cruisers moving fast must have hid behind the planet's gravity well. Dispatch the left flank to intercept. Keep me posted. Clever bastards, these monsters. But we'll take them down a notch, and I'll be welcomed home a conqueror of savage beasts. Sir, we're detecting energy buildup. Then get our ships moving. Commodore Cortina anxiously paced the deck, his head trained dually on the tactical map and rangefinders. He had been dispatched by Jones to harass those fuckers, and had decided the stealth approach to bring his 3 destroyers and 2 frigates into the back of the enemy lines. A suicide mission. Not if he had a say. Cortina, a section of their flank has turned to face us. I can see that, Livonia. Cortina was always curt with his AI. The dour and often fatalistic woman always stated the obvious. It was a tradition the two shared, and one that persisted even in these dire times. Weapons? Are we close? 500 kilometers before we're in range. Blackheart is taking fire, sir. Enemy corvettes approaching on the left flank, comms reported. Tell them to take evasive action. We're nearly at effective range. A shudder shook the ship. Shields at 87%. Damn, those bastards fire fast, engineering belted out. We're at 100 kilos, Commodore. Streaks of fire began to spew out of the approaching enemies and bounced or shattered their projectiles on the energy shields of his own group. The shields of the frigate Emerald Star shattered under the combined lucky fire of 3 enemy corvettes, and only managed to regenerate after a glancing blow sheared off her con tower. 50 kilos! Fire! Triple beams of blue light shot from the bow of the 3 destroyers, rending the 2 corvettes directly in their path. Mac rounds blasted from his frigates, bypassing the enemies, advancing on them, and firing into the lightly shielded backs of the enemy cruisers. Hard light weapons were a staple of modern destroyers, able to scythe through light armor and burn through shields. As Cortina's own ship, Great Horse, pumped its engines through the enemy lines, his lance shredded 1, 2, 3 ships, his fleet adding 3 more kills of their own before his own casualties started to rear. First went the Emerald Star, the frigate run through by a massive torpedo that must have hit the magazine. Blackheart was overtaken by fighters who overwhelmed the energy shields and riddled her with bombs. The Horse groaned as a round split her engine room in 2, totaling her slipspace drive. Comms? Order our lads into retreat. Tell them it was an honor. Cortina eyed the cruiser that must have been the enemy flagship and grinned. Helm, plot a new course. The enemy cruiser sent a shot straight through the bridge before the order could be carried out, killing the ship and her captain in one fell swoop. Great Horse has been disabled. Battle Group Milo is retreating. Admiral Jones had watched in disbelief as that damned Cortina cut a swath through the alien forces. He'd used the utter disarray the Commodore had caused as time to pull his forces back. Little that there still were. Only his flagship and 2 frigates had managed to disengage successfully, the sheer volume of fire overwhelming his fleet. Hundreds of fighters were still clashing in the wake, holding of the endless corvettes of the aliens at bay. The chatter among the air marshals was solemn and intense. He'd inflicted heavy losses on the aliens, but his own fleet was practically gone, reduced to a third. It pained him to flee the carcasses of his own ships, but resistance must survive if Shanxi was to withstand these invaders. Marshal IONS, give our fighters the retreat order. If they can't dock, soon direct them to Shanxi. Admiral, boarders are breaching Shanxi Station. The Willard has been disabled, sir. Jones felt a great weight of shame as he ordered his fleet to enter slipspace. Latrinox watched as the last of the enemy fleet disappeared into portals. The suicide ships that had launched into his rear were dealt with. Only a single of those spirits-damned laser cruisers escaping from his force. 12 of his ships lay destroyed or disabled, while his enemy was forced from the field. A victory, perhaps, but a costly one. His marine commanders were already preparing for the invasion of the planet below, and boarders were already working through the huge station that had caused him so much grief. He looked at a picture of a dead alien, a fleshy, hairy ape that looked suspiciously like an Asari. Internally, he despaired at what terrors he'd introduced to this weak-looking species. But he also dreamed of a future where he would be Primarch of this potential protectorate. He dreamed of the power he could wield, of the advances he could bring to this race that lacked even Ezo. This death was surely worth it, wasn't it? Chapter 5, The Ghosts of War. Space seemed too empty now. The light show around Shanxi had ended only a few minutes before, with God knows who winning. At the moment, his cargo ship, UNV, my other spaceship's a car, had been damaged by his idiot helmsman. Captain Arna bored his eyes into Jessa's skull as if she could read his mind, running headlong into the docking bay at Shanxi Station, which managed to throw off alignment on the slipspace nav and shear off his antenna. He was lucky to have been in dry dock on station when the all-call went out, else he'd likely be xenomorph food by now. He was luckier that he'd the foresight to start running cold before the aliens showed up and started blasting up the joint. Such were the pains of hiring family. His dad had insisted he bring along his niece Jessa as a pilot after his last one had decided to hop fleets. His loss, Arna Stellar Consortium, was one of the fastest-growing cargo haulers in the dead zone. Or at least that was the company line. His dad had come up with that one. Really, he wondered if his father had only had his 9 brothers and sisters to get cheap captains for his damn business. In any case, he began to think he may have been a little hard on Jessa. She was only 17 after all, and she'd been forced to dock at literally the most convoluted docking bay in human history. Everybody lost a bit of pride at Shanxi Station. Jessa just happened to lose a bit more than most. While Arna waited for Lanvu to repair his slipspace drive, he'd taken up a card game with one of his less recent hires, Minmac. Minmac was a grunt, or an ungoy if you were in polite society. Not that the bastards cared all that much, so long as you didn't shoot him. The little ungoy currently whipping his ass at Pishti was the patriarch of a small clan of his own. Himself, his 2 mates, and their 4 kids, all of which had taken refuge on his vessel. Ungoy were one of the more interesting cases following the collapse of the Covenant. Although some made their way back to their ancestral homeworld, or the few other methane-based planets they'd terraformed or found, the majority became wanderers in the stars, laborers and pioneers looking for better lives. In human space, though rarely on Earth, the Ungoy found the most success in this lifestyle, as instead of becoming serfs in the various Sanghali kingdoms, or essentially slaves in Kigyar settlements, humans were merciful in treating them as just second-class citizens. Most Ungoy would work if you fed them, supplied methane for them, or paid them the meager wages they seemed to boggle at. On some more recent colonies, Ungoy were beginning to make up 30 to 40% of the population, though they rarely had the right to suffrage. Shanxi, though, well, only humans were crazy enough to jump 100 light-years out without good comms, so it was mostly humans on Shanxi. Minmac was a friend, and a bastard of one at that, as he just won another round with another fucking perfect Pishti. That was the 3rd time it happened this game, and Minmac chittered greedily as another 10 credits were added to his winnings. I've been playing this game for 20 years, and I've never seen a fucker so lucky, Arna moaned as he transferred the credits. Guess you've never met a fucker like me, Esser. Minmac's voice was a deep, brassy thing that spewed from his mouth, a juxtaposition he'd never thought of before he'd met him 2 years prior. Another round? He grinned, holding his winning card playfully in his dexterous claws. Chew on your cables, spat Esser, motioning toward the 2 reinforced meth cables that allowed the Ungoy to work in oxygen at all. Nowadays, instead of the bulky apparatus that the Covenant forced them to wear, manufacturers had designed the discreet face mask and tank that opened mobility and reduced their profile from pyramid to simply bipedal. Esser stood to reach his intercom and punched in the code for the engine bay. Lanvu, are you done yet? I'm losing all my money here, won't have enough to pay you soon." A faint shout about the sin of gambling was all he heard from him, so he assumed it was still a few hours from working. Lan Vu got especially fire and brimstone when he was getting close to the end of a problem, but an unease had swept over him. Despite that, he wished that his wife, Yura, had stayed behind this time, that his grandmother wasn't left alone taking care of his son on Mercator. He wished quite a bit. Now he wished that he'd never played that damn grunt for money and lost nearly 100 credits for it. A life full of regrets, he mused, in a cargo bay full of grain, grapes, and 14 spacers. Clunk! The My Other spaceship shook as the titanium groaned under a piercing pressure. The air suddenly whisked out of the room, and then as quickly returned the biting smell of ozone permeating the air, the atmosphere noticeably thinner. "All call, is everyone all right?" The captain coughed into the intercom. Check-ins from all his crew sounded, each reducing his anxiety, if only marginally. "Jessa, the fuck happened?" Her chair spun around, revealing the slight and pale-skinned teen that had served as his helmsman this flight. "I have no idea. I was just looking at data readouts when something collided with our left. I mean port side. Okay. Do we have a damage report, Yura?" He radioed his XO and wife. "Lan Vu and Finster report damage on our port side. Explosive decompression was handled by adaptive foam, but we'll probably need a team to restore structural integrity." "Shit, okay. Minmac, can you get your boys on it?" There was no response, which prompted the captain to turn and find the grunt already gone. Rude little bastard, but eminently capable. "Jessa, can you tell what hit us? On-site cams are down, another headache in itself, but I think one of those asteroids might have hit us." She deftly typed, bringing up the aft cam on the blank wall and displaying the perfect blue of the gas giant whose rings the spaceship hit amongst. "Well, document one of those bastards for insurance. Christ, my premium is so going up after this." The intercom buzzed quietly, directing Azer's attention to the small blinking nub on the central console. He activated it with a press. "What's up?" "Hey, Cap, is Kara here?" Minmac's eldest son sounded much like his father, yet had a slower cadence and a poorer grasp of grammar. "Bulkhead arrived at, found a strange something. Father calls it a pod." Azer whispered into his niece's ear. "Call a general alert. Have Stolger and Asil meet me at the impact armed." He raised his voice for the young Ungoi to hear. "I think you guys should let us handle it, carrier. Tell your father that's an order." "Oh, come on, Captain," the father sounded through the comm. "Looks like scrap metal. Might be something nice in it. It's an order, Min-Mac, not a suggestion." He cut the comms. "Jessa, lock the cabin behind me, okay?" She nodded, a little startled at the request as he rushed out the door. The My Other spaceship was an F-IT 109 class freight hauler, essentially a small pressurized operations area with a 500-meter tall cargo hold attached to it vertically. Imagine a thick B-wing fighter. He was happy that the dam breach was nearby and didn't require a 5-minute turbolift ride. That ended when he arrived to an active battle. Glowing balls of energy spun above the strange metal structure, firing red-hot beams of energy. Career bore an angry burn across the chest, while Blind firing his plasma pistol, of human make, into the corridor. Minmac was charging his relic of a Covenant pistol, himself singed on his left arm. Fire forced the captain into an alcove a few meters distant, the grunts, while he heard a commotion marking Stolger and Asil's arrival. "What did you do?" Acer roared over the cacophony of battle. "It wasn't us, I swear. We just wanted to leave," responded Minmac, who fired his overloaded weapon into one balls, shattering it with a shower of sparks. "Holy shit!" The two men behind him, armed with shotguns and shield belts, dove to avoid the burning beams. Acer smashed a red button marking the intercom and screamed into it, "Borders!" before a furious beam melted the speaker and burned his hand terribly. "Fuck! Now what?" the straightforward Stolger demonstrated, jumping from his own alcove and firing a devastating blast from his shotgun, shattering the delicate energies holding the sphere together. "Good idea," Stolger deadpanned. "I guess? Now!" The three humans jumped up and blasted the spheres with shotguns and plasma. A quiet fell over the battlefield, broken only by the sparking of wires and the crackle of electrical fires. Behind the group of crewmen, another crash emanated, along with 4 robotic prongs that forced themselves through the hull. Dual burning lines etched themselves into the walls and began to carve a circle through the 2-meter-thick hull. Human and Ungoi stood in terror as they watched the beams arc inexorably toward each other. "Take cover," the captain shouted as the metal was punched inward, and tall, spindly things stormed outward, wrapped in metal armor and orange energy. Stolger reacted first, 2 claps from his shotgun, disrupting one thing's strange orange and blue shield, and then sending its form crashing into a jutting support beam. The following one was quicker, loading first Stolger's shield, and then his body with the whir of its gun. A seal was eviscerated by a third, which fired a blood-red bolt of energy into the woman, ripping a hole through her stomach and sending her to the ground. The captain sent a plasma round into the shotgun using form, sending it steaming into cover, its armor a white hot. He aimed a shot at the hunkered-down Ungoi. "Get out of here, you two!" Esser thudded back into cover, whizzing bolts impacting the walls. He looked at his gun for a moment, remembering the complete bypassing of its shield. Maybe this thing was worth 4,000 credits after all. He fired another burst of plasma, feeling the heat of the sleek pistol tickle his hands, his aim scoring a head shot on Stolger's killer. As he slid back into cover, he laughed. "That's right, you fuckers, die!" A sudden violent force thrust Esser into the ceiling, breaking his neck instantly. Zaid's lungs hurt from running. But without anti-armor weapons, that's what you did to combat a tank. At least that's what he told his men. The Raptor's armor had started landing only an hour before. He remembered fondly the rockets they'd spent on that armor, then the pocket railguns, then the Promethean beams, finally the anti-tank grenades. His emplacement had stopped 13 armored vehicles on Kilray Street before they were forced back. He tried to feel pride in that as he ran like hell through the street. Zaid had become the acting lieutenant of the Morning Stars Marines' first company only an hour before, and was currently leading the remains of that company along with a handful of militia back to the tertiary defense points. Problem was, that was half a mile down the street. The tanks weren't so distant. Boom! A blast sent Zaid stumbling, and chunks of militia women and asphalt spewing across the road, his shield flaring at the sight. "Get in cover," someone shouted, and Zaid took a suggestion, diving into a narrow alley with a few other militia already cowering. That raggedy band had only 2 rifles between them, and wounds that caked their Kevlar in blood. "The hell are you doing here? Get the hell up!" "Respectfully, Sarge, fuck that!" An explosion rocked the earth and screams echoed down the street. "I'm a damn lieutenant now, civvy, so get up or they'll be scraping your ass off this street." A familiar whirring interrupted the argument and brought hope to the group. Zaid looked up to see a Bumble drone, a tiny helicopter with a huge rocket bay, fire a barrage onto his street. A cheer went up the line as a distinctive pi-seonk of a Raptor shield collapsing primed a heavenly explosion. Zaid peeked out of the alley to find the Raptor infantry pinned by the ragged fire of others down the street, the oddly elegant tank reduced to scrap metal. His squad of militia had mustered now, 3 carrying 1, and all without shields. The newly minted lieutenant began to regret his harshness as he looked into the terrified faces of men and women that were janitors, shopkeepers, and farmers. People who signed up for the militia to get an extra stipend from the colonial government, not expecting much worse than pirate raids. This was no pirate raid. A scream shook past them. A UNSC fighter dodged around the bumbling drone, still flying away, pursued by a Raptor fighter that could scarcely keep up. "I'll give you bastards cover," Zaid shouted to the militiamen. "We'll hop alleys. I'll cover, then you, got it?" They nodded and ran out into the street, Zaid's rifle spitting plasma tips into the terrified enemy infantry. Then it was militia FMJs that cracked against the street. As Zaid ran, they inched backward, friendly MGs and small arms fire dwindling as the advancing aliens picked off Zaid's defenders. Not that they weren't falling like flies themselves. The plasma guns, rare as they were, melted through the Raptors without even bothering their shields. The lasers and beams were just as deadly, scything the aliens into cover or in half. Only poor old reliable bullets seemed to find any trouble, and even then it was hard not to wonder how such weak shields could be used by a military force. Two-thirds of the way to the defensive line, a stray shot killed the downed militia alleys past. Concentrated fire killed a second. But they made it. The militiamen dove into the sandbags and gun emplacements. Zaid made it himself, just in time for more tanks to begin their rumbling assault. Colonel Williams led the battered defense of the new landing starport. Usually it was a place where airplanes and space freighters transported goods acquired from Shanxi Station to the people of Shanxi. Now some 170 fighters called it home, a refueling and repair station protected by a massive shield generator, a few miles of entrenchments, and 10,000 barely equipped men. He was the last staff officer left, and so he was left commander of the 5th of the Defense Army stationed here. A rumble shook the new command building, but he paid it no mind. A third push had been made on his northern side by alien armor, and from the reports made by the commanders there, they would hold it. He'd sent the few Turesks he'd had to spare toward them to discourage another assault. He knew they wouldn't survive another. Colonel, a runner, half singed, met him in the crowded command center. More reports of magic, sir, a massive group of them on the western edge. Williams had wanted to keep tabs on these reports. At first, he thought his troops were simply losing their minds, but as combat footage began to pour in, he began to share his findings with the lieutenant general. Several teams of these wizards, as his men had taken to calling them, had been encountered and pushed back across the front, at considerable loss for his soft militia troops. As the Raptors tightened their grip around the starport, the ammo and reinforcements needed by his troops was spread thinner, and then only arrived through the underground tunnels that linked the major city centers. Williams nodded to the runner and directed the recently received Promethean chargers to the west. He also put in a call to the only special forces he still had. The shield flared, and a raptor stood behind him, staring at its glowing orange blade, dumbstruck at its failure to go through. A sharp kick threw the avian into a back wall, and a burst from his rifle split its shield and its skull. "You'd think these guys would wear helmets?" Cortana quipped. "Not that I'm complaining, of course." Chief knew better than to respond. He dropped his rifle, its magazine too close to empty, and retrieved the gun from the alien corpse. He'd been chasing what he'd assumed was an officer. Its armor was plated with gold after all, and that suited the Covenant. But he'd lost it after an armored car and a platoon of soldiers closed ranks around him. It felt like fighting an army of grunts, fighting these ones. Once their shield was broken, one pop in the head dropped them. Unlike the grunts, these ones never had the good sense to run. A sharp pang of static alerted the Spartan to a call. "Colonel Williams," Chief answered. "Master Chief, I'm sending you the location of a unit in need of relief. Be advised, reports of alien special forces with supernatural powers have been made." "Understood, sir." The Spartan hid his own skepticism as he began to slink his way through enemy lines, back to friendly territory. The starport was a sprawling thing, a massive central spire surrounded by landing fields, massive hangars, and an ocean of support buildings, hotels, and restaurants that ringed the landing fields themselves. All of it had turned into a battleground, the air bearing the familiar shimmer of dust, dirt, and blood. Fires raged, and the shield around the dome crackled constantly from missile fire and stray bullets. As the chief made his way back through the shield, the smell of ozone and gunpowder filtered its way through his helmet. He pondered the weapon he now held, the strange angular weapon that never seemed to reload. A shame it was a pea shooter compared to the weapons he'd been given by human forces. A memory came to him. As a recruit, they'd fire BBs at him in armor to test his reaction speeds to shield damage. The pathetic ping they gave when they bounced off sounded so much like the alien weapons. And yet what bounced off his shield pierced the armor of the reservists he fought with. The armor that looked more like 21st century Kevlar and plate than the 27's hard suits, which the regulars were equipped with. As John approached the no man's land that was the wide cratered street between human and alien territory, the garrison in trenches and behind reinforced storefronts cheered him on. He only feared for them. She awoke and she did not remember. She ran a diagnostic on her hardware. The status report brought back memories. It hurt when she looked back at her 5 friends who dove into a storm. She felt her body, broken, empty. Life signs were not detected. A hole was now where her friends were. Cortina, Herdris, Lau, all gone. Anger swelled as she began to reactivate her systems. But she thought better of it. The heat would signal her survival. She touched the transceiver and it reacted quickly. She ran diagnostics on the real space engines and found them dead. Why did I survive? She knew why. A secondary and tertiary AI core exists in modern destroyers. Modern destroyers were compartmentalized, and they could run without crews. She was chosen to survive. She beamed a message in Morse to the Black Heart and received nothing. Alexander was dead too. She concentrated her rage on a new plan. She spun up a pelican and measured the distance between the cruiser that killed her and her own drifting corpse. She had a plan. The ship had wide, comfortable halls and an easy feeling about it that almost masked the red and blue mess on the ground. 2 alien species? The female mused. Perhaps the Turians have planted more Jaunt than a patrol fleet can juice. The Solarian boarding party had more trouble than they'd been expecting. The shorter, stocky aliens were equipped with primarily energy weapons and breathing masks, an intriguing if terrifying prospect. The humans, as they discovered the tall, fleshy race was called, also possessed them, and a remarkable similarity to Asari anatomical structure. Related species, although convergent evolution was certainly possible, after all the vast majority of species are bipedal. It couldn't be determined till the genetic samples were returned to Citadel space. It was even less likely due to the presence of sexual dimorphism, but she'd let the biologists deal with that. Sadly, the computer drive had been damaged here as well, though its erasure hadn't been as thorough as its military counterparts. Her computer analyst had been severely wounded in the breaching by a primitive, if effective, shotgun. Disappointing, she'd start the analysis herself while he recovered. What was most troubling was the evidence that something had been in the bridge when they'd finally cut through the security bulkhead. It had escaped somehow, and scans were proving ineffective. Such annoyances would be dealt with when the team returned to their deployment base, at least. Stowaways were a problem best dealt with by people other than herself. She was looking forward more to the promotion she'd receive for her efforts here, and the commission she'd get from selling this info to the shadow broker. How juicy would that be? A first contact with 2 alien species, a hostile one at that, the scandal this would cause. She allowed herself a smile as she ordered her men to clean the viscera off the floor. She had more pressing matters to attend. Chapter 6. Just like old times. It was a relief to sit in transports that had doors. Cortana had explained to him, years ago, the rationale behind the doorless and armorless warthogs, but Jon found those explanations lacking the absolute truth. Sail by the lowest bidders. The future really was bright. The APC he was riding in was poorly fitting for him. The seat was meant for a normal soldier in the tough, yet slim, modern armor, or the UNSC, and not the bulkier armor he wore. That probably wouldn't have been a problem if he wasn't a foot taller than the average human, but that was neither here nor there. The car was silent, even as it was mostly filled. The air was dusty and tinged with the grimy iron scent of blood. The sterile lights cast haunting shadows on the militia men and soldiers alike. Their faces were exhausted, dead. But the western flank was collapsing, and so there they went. The Spartan attracted less attention now. Jon had been everywhere on this battlefield, shoring up line after line that was close to breaking. The novelty had seemed to wear off, at least to some extent. "We're here, good luck," the driver announced as the car skidded to a stop. The heavy mechanical door clanged down suddenly. The soldiers filed out, jumping onto the blast-stained asphalt and rushing into the hastily dug trenches and barricades. They'd been let out at the fallback line, the car already moving, as Chief began his exit. The western line was a scene of barely organized chaos. Medics and relief forces ran with purpose, Civilian trucks and mechs worked side by side with military vehicles to clear wreckage, transport the wounded, and tow supplies. The hulking mass of the double-barreled Turesk tanks rolled the earth with every shot and added their notes to the symphony of battle all around them. A sergeant was explaining something to a squad of Marine heavy gunners when Jon approached. Something about the deadliest son of a bitch on the battlefield. "I need your fire support." "God damn it, I told you 1,000 times we're waiting for—" As the Marine turned, her soul promptly exited her body. "Oh, I'm sorry, Whatever you need, Chief." The Spartan nodded before taking the assault rifle out of her hands and replacing it with the alien postmodern gun. The 7 Marines around her stifled grins and readied their weapons. "Sir?" A shorter man came up to Jon, carrying a short, stocky thing he identified as a beam weapon. "You'll use this better than me, sir. Just point and shoot." Jon took the weapon and felt its heft. Jon again nodded before patting the man on the shoulder and starting toward what he knew was the Western Front. The commandeered squad watched him go. "We should follow him, right?" a Marine asked. The sergeant ran to keep up, and the squad followed. When their little band arrived at the front, Jon decided to take modern military intelligence at face value from now on. A blast of purple energy emanated from a glowing purple alien standing on the opposite end of the street, shredding a gun emplacement and sending a gunner flying. The return fire was intercepted by a bright purple shield, which stood up to impossible punishment before the wizard pulled back. "I count 5 wizards marking likely positions." Cortana set blips across his HUD. Comms chatter from surrounding friendlies indicates at least 10 more in proximity. "I'd say these guys are an elite unit. They might converge on us if we engage. Then we'll kill them." Cortana sighed. "I thought you might say that. I'd recommend a stealth approach. Might catch them off guard. Do you have a route past the street?" He zoomed out his visor and readied his weapon. "I was thinking we pull a canny." Though he couldn't see it, he could hear the classic smirk. "I hate it when you think. When the 172nd Patrol Fleet requested the 101st Atacom Corps to deal with a Batarian illegal colony, they thought their admiral overcautious, paranoid that Batarian ground forces could put up a fight against even a tenth their number of Turian infantry. Now Jordai wished they'd brought the whole damn army group. Jordai was the leader of a cabal, the Bloody Talons, and had been assigned to the invasion of what had been revealed to be primitives, with a capital P. Apparently they were called Menisker or some such, but he'd stopped caring after the 5th Cabal Squad was forced back from the Spire. This spaceport and its spurts-damned ugly spire had been the bane of Turian air superiority and the Bloody Talons for over 4 days, giving the Prims a place to launch their fighters and hide the estimated 20,000 troops they had inside its shield. Many on the ground had suggested a greater diversion of resources to this thorn in the side of the campaign, but reinforcements were late in arrival, and forces had been able to slowly push back in the city, despite losses from the air. Desperation had forced local commanders into using more and more of his Cabal units to try and break the lines at the port. Now his team of 20 biotics was probing the defenses on the west side, and Germanics found an opening. "Cabalum Jordai, I am certain. After our last assault, no other forces have appeared in the courtyard. I'm sure it's simply a tactical error. It can't last forever. We must take advantage now." Jordai believed him. The Prims always forced his cabal back after an assault, always garrisoned a position. Perhaps they'd simply withdrawn to a new defensive line. Contacts across the rest of the old line suggested otherwise. "Perhaps this is the breakthrough we need. Prepare our men. We'll try to secure this break." Tension flowed from Germanics. "Thank you, Cabalim." He raced off to gather the men. Germanics was quicker than expected, and in only a few minutes his forces were advancing slowly to the emplacement they'd shattered 20 minutes before. The fighting had been in a courtyard, a ruined shopping front plastered against the back, with low stone storefronts surrounding it. Jordani sent 2 of his men to secure each flank and began the advance. His 2 columns flanked the center of the yard and inched ever closer. "Comms check, everything clear?" Jordai clipped. "I see movement," one of his operatives said. "Oh shit, we've been flanked." Gunshots erupted on his left. Jordai managed to get cover read way before the Prims sprung their trap. a group of the heavily armored Prims broke a window on the other side of the courtyard, and a machine gun opened up directly into his right column, blasting 2 of his men into the dirt and sending the rest of them into cover. On the left, his forces were faster than the ambushers and deployed a biotic barrier to shield their scramble for cover. Holding such a barrier against a machine gun would have been impossible for anyone Turian. Cabals were not so limited. The 2 groups had managed to maneuver themselves behind the stone planters that ringed the courtyard by the time the barrier fell. The majority of his men were now pinned in the center, sandwiched between 2 bad places. Jordai launched a shockwave of blasts blindly into the face of the fire, his own barriers flaring from the hits he took. That only seemed to make them angry, as laser fire poured out of the windows of the house in response. His right wasn't doing much better, dodging and throwing back grenades that began to rain on them. Jordai debated a retreat, but steeled himself. If the regulars arrive, we might be able to secure a break in the lines. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Sprinting in the open was a towering Prim, armored in brutal, fully enclosed armor. A dull green spattered in dark blue blood. Turian blood. "Barrier front!" Jordai shouted, beginning to form the tall wall of purplish energy himself. Yet the soldier kept running. One of his operatives threw another shockwave, its pulsing blast cracking the concrete pavement beneath. That's when the bastard jumped, clearing the biotic wave and barrier by nearly a meter. He raised his rifle, another order on his mandibles, when it landed. Jon landed on a wizard and crushed its head in a crunch of gore. He rolled to disperse the shock of landing, bringing the freshly dead enemy into the tumble and throwing it into the embattled line of troops he'd found himself in. The corpse crashed into a distracted wizard who fell to the ground. Jon fired his laser into the next operative, whose bright purple shield shone brilliantly before shattering. That gave it enough time to react and forced him to dodge a missile of the purple stuff it launched from its hands. These ones have better shields? This changes things. He pulled a grenade, setting it to sticky and lobbing it in one smooth motion towards the now unshielded alien. It detonated as he dove into the other line, which had just begun to react. He faintly noted Cortana directing his Marines into better positions as he crashed into another wizard, this one brandishing the orange blade these aliens seemed to favor. He pulled his gun barrel close this time, dragging the weapon under its shield and firing across its chest as the alien's own blade slashed uselessly against his shield. The neighboring alien was luckier. It launched its own burst of energy, catching his laser and tearing it painfully from Jon's arm. He countered with a powerful jab into the wizard's torso, cracking the armor and drawing a strangled gasp, cut short by Jon's pistol, which reduced its head to a charred stump. "I'm keeping this plasma pistol," the Spartan thought, grabbing the listing body and turning it into a meat shield. Jon let the 3 advancing aliens fire their pea shooters into the mangled corpse of their ally, lining up shots with his pistol quickly and forcing the aliens to create their damn barrier again. However, his Marines hadn't been idle. The gunner spun his barrel into the backs of the now exposed enemy, catching 2 in spurts of energy and gore. At this, the barrier collapsed, and a burst of plasma finished the last. A taller alien, wearing a jet-black hardsuit with purple adornments, screamed something in the harsh, resonating language the enemy used, before leveling his rifle at him. Jon raised the body and noticed the withdrawal of the aliens, hurried and disorganized. It was about then that he realized the commander hadn't been firing his gun. "Chief, get down!" Cortana screamed. Jon obeyed, throwing his meat shield and running for cover. Unfortunately, he didn't have to. A blast of purple threw him into a sidewall, and luckily, behind the thick stone benches that lined the yard. He shook off the blast and began to stand, just as the annoying alien jumped over the bench, fist wreathed a shade of ugly violet. He leapt to his right, the fist inches from his helmet, and kicked backwards, scoring a painful blow to the alien and launching it 10 meters away. He sprinted after it, meeting the stunned alien as it tried to stand and slapping it onto the ground, unconscious. At least he hoped so. Surveying the battlefield yielded a familiar satisfaction. The corpses of the enemy were strewn across it. the wizard team fleeing back into the woodwork of enemy territory. I still can't get used to wizard. Honestly, who came up with that? Cortana began, before Jon smacked his helmet. Point taken. I'll call for transport? Sure. Jon hoisted the limp body of the wizard leader onto his shoulder before beginning a search for his weapons. Seriously, though, warlocks would be a much more interesting name. Jon sighed audibly as he began to pick through the wreckage. She remembered her name. Livonia, an old name for an old place on Earth. That meant it had to be erased. If she failed in her attempt, nothing of Earth could be left to find. Suddenly, she was UNSC Smart AOI CTN 6268 ND. She remembered she had a name. She couldn't remember what. The Pelican drifted slowly towards the enemy. Inside, the small robotic mech used for cargo unloading stood motionless, then suddenly sprung into action. In its arms was the universal chip that was now the home for an AI. The mech shuffled into the massive drop pod that was shoved into the Pelican Bay doors. It waited again. 5 hours passed as Livonia went over the plan. Then she watched as her body spun to life. The great horse was mostly dead, her engines totaled, hard light projector scrambled. But her missile pods were still active. The AI had set them to attack exactly 7 hours after her departure. The light show began right on time. Approximately 250 missiles, torpedoes, and nukes spilled out of the craft, targeting anything close by. She launched her drop pod, aiming at what she assumed was the alien flagship. She took note of the reinforcements now in orbit. She counted 200 ships. Worry crept into her mind. So many ships. She couldn't dwell. As the mess of missiles spun through the fleet, she hoped her stealthy drop pod wouldn't be noticed. Still, it was a tense 30 seconds as she sped across the night. She watched as a ship spun towards her body and mangled it more with its cannon. A pang of loss ran through her. In a moment, she was there. The massive flagship loomed over her. She forced the pod to slow. She watched for an opening, an airlock. Near the back of the ship, she found one. A small affair near the engines. She watched the laser batteries shift and track unseen targets. Could only hope they never caught her. She made it, though. Her pod drifted next to the ship, bare meters away. The mech opened the pod carefully before slinking out and pushing the craft away. The final part of the plan. Her whole being was now trapped in a device the size of a grapefruit. Even the mech was simply a machine now, not a tool to be used. The mech jammed the universal storage device into the airlock interface. Essentially just a big hole. But after a second, she could feel the systems hiding beneath the surface. It was alien and strange. But she could manage. She felt her mind slip into the ship's stream of data and soon into the fleet's. She'd made it, and nothing would stop her. The news droned on endlessly, a cacophony of dull voices and sharp inflections. They spoke about many things: grain prices on harvest, the Ungoi colony on Kipchai, a sex scandal likely engineered by the athletes it featured, the emergency beacon on Shanxi. She felt like shutting it off, but she was comfortable in bed. Amore, could you please watch the news later? I'm trying to sleep. She rarely got to do that nowadays. Her AI appeared on the display, a bright flash of green alerting her to his presence. It is 5:30 a.m., Madam Chancellor. I presume you don't wish to be late? She groaned. Amory was right. She didn't want to be late. Not to this meeting. She tried to sit up, yet a sharp and encompassing agony met her motion. A gasp of pain escaped her lips, and she fell back onto the bed. Madam, shall I apply your brace? A snippy retort came to my chest, but she fought it down. Amore's body entered the room, the warm green and silver of the service droid contrasting the crisp black of her brace. The device was practically an exoskeleton, but that was a closely held secret. Such were the demands of democratic governance. Amore helped the Chancellor roll over and place the device on her back. She felt the thing send warm rivers of metal down her legs and arms before it locked. She moved first an arm, then a leg, then both in junction as she pushed herself over bed. She examined the flat, tattoo-like band of metal as it settled on her skin. Thanks, Amore. She stood, patting the robot heartily on its shoulder. Of course, Patricia. I am here to serve. He began to gather her clothes for the day. Shall I run through the day now? Patricia was already in the shower. Why not? She shouted over the running water. You have a meeting with the Ungoi Settler Coalition at 9:30 a.m., lunch with the President of the Commons at noon, and the defense review shortly after. Then you'll have the Tao Brinkman proposal to review at 5 p.m. Christ, can't those xenophobic assholes take no for an answer? Patricia fumed at that. Representative Tao had been yelling and screaming up and down all human space about grunts in our backyard for the past 6 months and had pushed his self-aggrandizing bill that bans all Ungoi from human space through both the House of Commons and the House of Governors. It was hard to think he wasn't in the hands of the Guyanus or the Fists of Man or whoever. As much as I agree, madame, you have a duty. After that, we're clear. Oh? Light day then. Relatively speaking, I suppose, DeSalva or Klenico watch madame. Let's spice it up, DeSalva. Then your outfit is ready. I shall await you outside. She listened to the graceful steps of her assistant as he left her room. She sighed before twisting the water off and leaving the security of the shower. She examined herself in the mirror, traced the scars up her legs and arms. She let the memory wash over her. The pain came in shattering waves, the spasms so painful yet so organized, calculating. She felt her mind retreat, felt her fists curl into white. Then it was gone. She breathed raggedly. The world felt sharper now, it always did after that. She let her machine do her makeup today, and then dressed herself, humming a charming tune she couldn't quite remember, before she met Omri outside. Breakfast today? The AI asked. I'll skip it today, thanks. Straight to business, then. He sounded almost disappointed. She secretly suspected he enjoyed cooking. Patricia was already down the stairs when he said it, snatching a coat off the rack, before opening the door and striding into the early sun. It felt good to be on Earth again. Say what you will about alien vistas, but nothing beats sunrise on the cradle of man. The posted guards said their typical pleasantries as she was walked to her car and waited for her escort. She waited for a Mori to arrive before plotting a course to the Capitol complex and letting her car drive her to work. She admired the skyline of Arcadia, the sweeping spires and simple elegance of the purpose-built the capital of the United Human Government. Following the end of the Great War, the moving of the capital to the terraformed lands of Africa was seen as a good move towards the idea of rebirth, as Oni's propaganda chief called it way back. That, along with the rewritten Charter of Humanity and surrender of emergency powers, meant that the newly christened UHG had quite a bit of room to reform and address the problems with the old. That meant a new legislative branch, a new executive branch, and the input of hundreds of representatives from every corner of human space. Patricia was glad she was just a high schooler back then. The complex, as most people called it, was the massive Neo-Greco-Roman building that housed the three houses and the executive offices. It was a labyrinthian building, yet as she rounded her 5th year in office, it had started to grow on her. Sort of like a cobbled-together character in a show, you learn to look around its design-by-committee nature. Still, she needed to use her contact lenses HUD map to find out where the hell the welcoming room was. When Patricia finally made it to the room, she found the Ungoi delegation waiting. The delegation was a motley crew. The Ungoi were a group of 5. A relatively tall bugger seemed to be the leader. Clothed in long, beaded robes and conversing animatedly with his other, more drably covered assistants, whom wore tunics of multicolored cloth and utilitarian pants. The other 2 were guards, who managed to look almost menacing in their dark black tunics, plasma pistols at their belts. "Chancellor Durazo!" the beaded one exclaimed as it rushed to greet Patricia. She shook its strangely warm hand and realized that this was the closest she'd ever come to an Ungoi without trying to kill it. The thought threw her off, but after a second too long she replied, "Welcome to Earth, respected one, Diltil. Please, sit down." It became a surprisingly pleasant conversation, if one looked past the harsh and yet paradoxically high-pitched tones the Ungoi used. The assistants stood and attended to the Ungoi ambassador's needs, while simultaneously writing down every word exchanged, a strangely antiquated way of recording, especially as it was happening on what looked like a tablet. The topic of conversation shifted from the right to simply exist within human space, to the right to colonize the few methane-based planets that were nominally within human territory. Ungoi rights, civil protections, all of it broached astutely and with intelligence she hadn't expected from a grunt. She'd have to reevaluate her own prejudices. She was about to ask about the future of Ungoi populations within human colonies when an aide practically ran into the room, startling both sets of guards in the room, as well as the conversation. The disheveled man knelt down and whispered into her ear, "Intel on Shanxi has been gathered. Lycaon contingency has been declared." Her veins filled with ice. The low thrum of the engines was soothing to Jessa. The wind swam neatly around her, the vents shunting air up and down the superstructure of spaceship, chilling her to the bone. A cold mist had settled over her and her blanket. She'd set up a sleeping spot near the engines to get as much warmth as possible, and yet that was beginning to fail as well. She'd have to start the plan now if she was going to have any strength left. The spindles, what she called those fucking aliens, had left the engine room for some damn reason. She estimated they'd nearly figured out how to turn the thing on. She wasn't going to let that happen. Quietly, she slipped open the vent that led into the room and crept toward the console. She avoided stepping in the brownish stains that covered the floor. It made her skin crawl just thinking about them. The heat of the room was a welcome thing, and it made her sweat profusely. Or maybe it was the fact that she was acting out a part in a damn spy movie that did that. Once she reached the console, she adjusted a few values and ran down the coolant levels. It only took a few seconds for the alarm to start blaring. That's when she smashed a few pipes. Maybe a bit too brazen, the fire that spewed out of the heat sink's vents nearly burned her. But it would certainly occupy the Spitals' time. She ran back into the vent and began an uncomfortable race through the vent systems. If the bastards were even a little cautious about this, her plan wouldn't work. Still, it was all she had. The cold metal couldn't cool the fire burning in her blood as she ran, climbed, and sometimes jumped her way through the vent system. Finally, her mad dash slowed to a crawl. She was almost there. The bridge was a compact affair, and the vent leading to it was more so. She inched towards it on her belly and peered through the grate. Fuck, it wasn't empty. One of the fuckers was still sitting at her seat, fiddling with the console. She knew what she had to do. Opening this grate was a delicate thing. She remembered from her escape only a few days before that this was a squeaky bastard, and yet she opened it cleanly. She crawled out gingerly and began a slow walk towards the chair. The fuzzy green chair that Uncle Acer had bought just for her. He was an ass sometimes, but when she saw him get thrown, something began to well in her throat. That's when she stepped on the creaky tile. The spindle spun in Jess's chair, a look of surprise evident. She leapt with the wrench she'd clenched tight. It raised its hand, but couldn't intercept the first sickening crunch of the weapon. Or the second. Or the third. She dropped the wrench, hands trembling. She couldn't tell if it was dead, but it had stopped moving. She dumped it out of her seat, but noticed the blood that now coated it. She moved her chair out of the way and began to type. A slip-space jump with even a slightly misaligned nav would send them spinning off into space. With any luck, the damage she'd caused would send the ship into oblivion. She sputtered in some nonsense coordinates as thumping sounded down the hall. She pressed a button, and the ship ripped a hole in the fabric of reality. A spindle screamed something alien behind her, but she didn't turn. She accelerated the ship into the portal, the G-force slamming her into the deck. She was grabbed by a spindle. It was yelling something in her face. Its eyes reminded her of the salamanders back home on Mercator. They were filled with the motley blue of slip space, wide maybe with fear. She couldn't tell. The ship shuddered before she felt the telltale sign of slip space exit. She turned in fear. Did they find a way to stop her? As the ship re-entered real space, she began to scream. It loomed in the darkness of space, a red sun illuminating it with a gleam. The spindle only stared, dropping her in shock as others rushed to enter the room, weapons drawn. They were paralyzed by the sight. Dumbstruck, Some dropped their weapons. Before them laid a ring,